Hello everyone. Welcome to Mystic Macabre 01, where we bring you real, chilling, and mysterious ghost stories. If you're a fan of the paranormal, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and get ready to step into today's story. Scary True. Night Shift. Alone at Work. Horror Stories. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to never miss a spooky story. Trapped in the parking garage. The night was cold, and a thick mist clung to the streets of downtown like a shroud. Ethan Foster pulled his coat tighter around himself as he entered the security office of the old condominium where he worked the night shift. The building had once been grand, but time had gnawed at its edges, leaving behind dimly lit corridors, faulty cameras, and eerie blind spots that made his job unnerving. Ethan had worked there for nearly 6 months, and in that time, he had grown accustomed to the building's quirks. He knew which doors creaked the loudest, which security monitors glitched at random, and which areas of the parking garage were best avoided if he didn't want to get a chill up his spine. One particular spot unsettled him the most, a dead-end hallway in the underground parking lot. The walls were old and water-stained, and the flickering light above always seemed seconds away from burning out completely. Tonight, as part of his routine, he had to check that hallway. He sighed, grabbing his flashlight before stepping out of the office. The halls of the building were silent except for the occasional hum of an elevator or the distant sound of a car starting outside. Descending into the parking garage, Ethan felt a familiar unease settle over him. The fluorescent lights buzzed, casting long, distorted shadows. His boots echoed against the concrete as he made his way toward the dead-end hallway. When he arrived, he noticed something unusual. A glass bottle, rolling slightly back and forth near the wall, as though it had just been set down. Frowning, he stepped forward, picking it up. As he turned to leave, a sudden gust of air whooshed past him, followed by the heavy clang of metal. Ethan spun around just in time to see the door he had entered through slam shut. He rushed toward it, gripping the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Hello?" he called out, his voice swallowed by the silence. He pressed his radio, but all he got was static. His phone, no signal. The air in the hallway grew thick, and a strange sensation prickled at the back of his neck. Something wasn't right. The temperature dropped, his breath coming out in visible puffs. Then a sound, a slow, deliberate scraping noise, echoed from the darkness behind him. Ethan whipped around, flashlight trembling in his grip. The hallway was empty, but the sound continued. It was closer now. A faint whisper slithered through the silence, unintelligible, but undeniably real. Cold dread coiled in his stomach. He wasn't alone. The scraping grew louder, now resembling footsteps dragging across the concrete. He took a shaky step back, his mind racing. Had someone locked him in here on purpose? Were the thieves he had heard rumors about setting him up? Then he saw it, a shadow at the far end of the hallway, just beyond the reach of his flashlight. It was tall and unmoving. At first, he thought it was a trick of the dim light, but then it shifted ever so slightly. Panic surged through him as he banged on the door. "Let me out!" he yelled. The shadow inched closer. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The air felt electric, charged with something unseen yet undeniably present. Then, without warning, the lights overhead flickered violently before going out, plunging the hallway into darkness. Ethan's breath hitched. He swung the flashlight wildly, but the beam barely cut through the pitch-black void. The scraping sound returned, now right behind him. He turned. Nothing. But the air had shifted, as if something had just moved past him. A whisper brushed against his ear, so close it sent a jolt of ice through his veins. "Not supposed to be here." Ethan stumbled backward, slamming against the door. He pounded on it desperately, adrenaline surging through his body. Suddenly, from the other side, there was a sound, a click. The door creaked open, and he tumbled into the parking garage, gasping for breath. A man stood there, a passerby who had happened to hear his frantic banging. "Are you okay?" the stranger asked, concerned. Ethan didn't answer immediately. His flashlight beam swept across the hallway behind him. It was empty. But the bottle he had picked up earlier was now upright, placed neatly in the center of the hall. The next morning, the security footage revealed what the thieves had been up to while Ethan was trapped. Several cars had been broken into, their alarms never sounding, the perfect distraction. But what the cameras didn't show, what no one could explain, was why the hallway door had closed on its own, or why, in the very last frame before the lights flickered out, a tall, shadowy figure could be seen standing right behind Ethan, the gas station nightmare. The neon glow of the gas station sign buzzed faintly against the quiet hum of the deserted highway. Sam adjusted his uniform and stepped behind the counter, still getting used to the loneliness of the night shift. It was his third night on the job, and he had already learned that the graveyard shift wasn't for the faint of heart. Drunks, wanderers, and the occasional creepy regular were just part of the territory. Tonight, though, the air felt different, thicker, charged with something unseen. He tried to shake it off, focusing instead on the clock ticking toward midnight. Just a few more hours. The bell above the door jingled, and Sam glanced up. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a cold, assessing stare. His clothes were worn but deliberate, his heavy boots clunking against the tile floor. Sam tensed as he moved toward the coolers, pulling out a six-pack of beer. "Hey, man," the guy said, placing the beer on the counter. "Ring this up." Sam hesitated, glancing at the clock. "Sorry, I can't sell alcohol past midnight. It's the law." The man didn't move at first, just stared at him with an unreadable expression. Then he smirked, leaning on the counter. "Come on, man. No one's gonna know. Just ring it up." Before Sam could respond, the door jingled again. More men entered. 3, then 4, all of them looking just like the first. Shaved heads, dark clothing, eyes that glimmered with something dangerous. They spread out, some heading to the coolers, others loitering near the entrance. "You new here?" the first man asked, still smirking. "Don't want to get off on the wrong foot, do ya?" Sam swallowed hard. His hand hovered over the register, his instincts screaming at him to just do what they asked. But if the boss checked the receipts in the morning, he'd be screwed. I really can't. I'd lose my job," he stammered. The man's smirk faded, replaced by something colder. "That right?" His voice was softer now, more dangerous. "That's a real shame." One of the others popped open a beer, taking a slow sip right in front of Sam. Another leaned on the counter, tapping his fingers against the surface in an unsettling rhythm. Outside, more of them gathered near the gas pumps, their laughter low and mean as they watched him through the glass. Sam's heart pounded. He was trapped behind the counter with nowhere to go. He glanced at the security cameras, old, probably not even recording. His phone was in his pocket, but he didn't dare reach for it. "Look, man," he tried again, his voice shaky. "I really need this job. The first man slammed his hand on the counter, making Sam flinch. "What you need is to loosen up. We're just having a good time. Right, boys?" A chorus of low chuckles followed. The minutes stretched on, agonizingly slow. They drank, laughed, and jeered at him, making crude jokes about what might happen if he didn't play nice. Sam could feel the sweat trickling down his back, the fear coiling tight in his stomach. Then finally, he worked up the courage to speak. "You guys need to leave. Now." Silence. The air went still. The first man stared at him, unblinking. Then he smiled, slow and cruel. "All right, kid, we'll leave, but maybe we'll see you around." One by one, they filed out, their laughter echoing as they disappeared into the night. Sam waited until their taillights vanished down the highway before he collapsed against the counter, shaking. He quit the next morning, unable to shake the feeling that they'd be back. And worse, that next time, he wouldn't be so lucky. The coffee shop stalker. The fluorescent glow of the coffee shop sign flickered against the empty streets as James wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night. The graveyard shift was usually quiet, but he didn't mind. He had his usual routine, stocking cups, cleaning machines, and waiting for the occasional late-night customer. And, of course, there was Nick. Nick had been coming by for months. At first, James appreciated the company. It was nice to have someone to chat with during the long, slow hours. But over time, something about Nick started to unsettle him. The way he stared a little too long, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, the way he always seemed to know when James was alone. That night, the streets were eerily empty, and a strange sensation prickled the back of James's neck. He glanced out the large front window and saw a figure standing beneath the street lamp. It was too dark to make out any features, but the figure wasn't moving. A chill crawled up his spine. He turned away, trying to shake off the unease, when the door jingled. Nick. James exhaled, forcing a smile. "Hey man, usual coffee?" Nick grinned, but something about it felt off. "Yeah, thanks, James." James busied himself making the drink, keeping his hands steady even as his pulse quickened. When he turned back, Nick was staring at him, unblinking. "You okay?" James asked, trying to sound casual. Nick's grin widened. "You're here alone tonight, huh?" James hesitated. "Yeah, just me." Nick chuckled softly. "That's brave. You never know who might be out there." James forced a laugh, but his hands clenched around the counter's edge. "Yeah, I guess." Nick stepped closer. Too close. James could smell his cologne, sharp and overpowering. "You know, James," he said, voice lower now, "I feel like we've gotten pretty close." James swallowed. "Yeah, man, you're a regular." Nick tilted his head. "More than that, don't you think?" James's stomach knotted. He glanced at the clock. Only 3 more hours. Just keep him talking. Nick's fingers drummed against the counter. Then, in an instant, he lunged forward, pressing James against the back wall. James's breath hitched. "Nick, what the hell?" Nick's grip tightened. "Why do you always pull away from me, James? I know you feel it too." James's mind raced. He needed to get out, now. Summoning all his strength, he shoved Nick backward, breaking free. He sprinted toward the back exit, heart hammering. He barely made it outside before slamming the door shut and locking it. His car. He had to get to his car. Nick was already pounding on the back door. James fumbled for his keys, nearly dropping them as he sprinted to his vehicle. He threw himself inside, locking the doors just as Nick emerged from the alley. Nick's face twisted in rage. He slammed his hands against the driver's side window. "You can't run from me, James." James barely heard him over the pounding of his own heartbeat as he dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was the only thing that kept him grounded. "Help is on the way." Nick's furious expression suddenly changed. He took a step back, then another. A car engine roared to life, and before James could react, Nick peeled out of the parking lot and disappeared into the night. James never saw him again. He chose not to press charges, but the fear never left him. Weeks later, management decided to cancel overnight shifts altogether. No one said it outright, but James knew. Some nightmares are better left in the dark,